Hey everyone, Matt here with Dukes Models, and welcome to part 8 of the Kinetic Hornet build review. This time out, we'll be playing with the canopy, the tails, various upper details, and a general medley of things. Alright, so let's get this going with the rear air brake. Now, a lot of times, a lot of kits, you see this positioned up, but that's very rarely the case. And so I figured I would go ahead and glue this in the closed position just to see how well it fits that way. And the fit is actually really good, except maybe up by that hinge point area. But where it actually fits into the fuselage, it's really hard to find fault with that. A little bit of glue, and voila. Now let's look at the tails. So we've got the tails and we've got these little PE parts that are supposed to go in here. So I tried to figure out how these fit, and it just makes no fucking sense. So I decided, screw it, I'm going to leave them off. Now the tails have a slightly squared off profile at the top that doesn't quite match the real Hornet. So sanding stick to the rescue. Just very lightly giving these a slightly better profile. There you can see it's got a little bit more of a rounded look to it. And the Hornet's not super round, but it's definitely not that like straight up square. So how do the tails fit? Well, they slot right in. The port tail is a little bit floppy. The starboard tail locks pretty much right in place. So add a little bit of glue here. That one sets up almost immediately the way it needs to go. Port tail's a little bit trickier. As you can see here, it has some trouble holding its place. I mean, let go of it and it sags. Fuck. Okay, well, hold it in place. You know, utilize patience, etc. But eventually it gets there. So moving on to the stabilators. These things fit pretty well. I will say that the port one, the way it fits kind of pops it up a little bit. Again, the starboard is dead on. So get a little bit of glue in here and force this guy into the right position. Now these seem to lock in a little better than the port tail does. It holds, you know, once it just gets enough glue in there to do its thing, it's pretty much fine. Starboard side just needs a tiny little bit of glue, and that's pretty much it. It just does its thing. And so there we go with the stabs. Now moving into the upper details. Start with adding some glue here for the upper deck. That just slots right into place. A little bit of MEK along this joint here. This is one you might want to hit with some Mr. Surfacer 500 or something like that to fill in slightly. Other than that, just glue all the way around. Give it some pressure to lock it really in place. And voila. Now we've got these leading edge extension fences going in. Again, these are plug and play. Just drop them in the holes. Glue, make sure they're aligned. Here's the other side. Nice and simple. Now let's go ahead and nail these antennas. These are pretty painless. On to the canopy. Now the canopy and the windscreen both have that nice centerline seam that has to be dealt with. My preferred way of doing this is first starting with a rounded X-Acto blade to sort of scratch away the seam. Very gentle, you know, very light scraping, but it saves sanding over and over and over again. Just work slow. Once that seam is removed, it's time to come in with the tri-grit stick. So start with the rough. Just go ahead and sand that seam down. You know, this isn't, as we used to say around work, this isn't rocket surgery. Switch over to the medium grit and go the opposite way, and then switch over to the polishing side. Get this nice and smooth. Come in with micro mesh for additional polishing. And that looks pretty good, if a tiny little bit hazy. So the next step is some Novus polishing powder. This stuff is pretty magical. Just work it in with the Q-tip. And you may want to have a couple Q-tips on hand, because once one gets loaded up, you want to kind of dump it and get another one and keep going. And just keep working and working and working until the polish is kind of all gone. And that looks pretty nice. So now let's install the framing into the canopy. Slots right up in there like that. Nothing to it. Definitely recommend painting this part before installing it into the canopy though. And then since we're doing this build quickly, I'm going to use Tamiya Extra Thin to slot this in place. I think that would be fine on sort of the aft side of the canopy, but once you get up towards the front, especially if you're doing this after it's been painted, Tamiya Extra Thin is going to make a hell of a mess, so something else might be more appropriate. Now let's deal with the HUD. This is another problem area with the Kinetic kit. So it's got a nice little lens there. The HUD piece doesn't quite fit in this recess that's there for it, which makes things frustrating, as you'll see in a second. And so the HUD glass gets added in. Now comes the fun part. When you go to fit the windscreen, the HUD is too tall for the windscreen to clear. So to come in here and do some nasty cutting of the thing with the PE cutters. And then once that's done, everything fits pretty nicely. I mean, the windscreen here is a definitely rough fit. It takes a lot of sanding up front, and to me it actually speaks to the benefit perhaps of cutting off that upper nose portion of the upper fuselage and just gluing it to the nose. I think that would give you another tiny little bit of space to work with up front with the canopy there, which would probably improve the fit on this side of things. Because as you can see up front there, it is not clean. And with that, we'll leave part 8 with the canopy ready to go, the tails installed, all that stuff, and move on to part 9, where we will be installing ordnance.